Here's something I've been chewing on for probably the last year or two. I've been doing all of this research into retirement, reading, watching videos, asking all of my friends, pulling up retirement calculators late at night when I probably should have been sleeping. And I keep running into the same handful of questions over and over and over again that nobody seems to be able to give me a real straightforward answer on. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got a rule of thumb, but when you actually sit down and try to pin somebody down on how much you really need, or when you should actually pull the trigger on Social Security, or what your taxes are actually going to look like once you do retire, you get a shrug and well, it all depends. And you know what? It does depend. I get that. But I've started to believe there are actual answers underneath all of that depending. And I've spent a good chunk of the last year or two trying to dig them out for myself instead of just accepting the shrug and the it all depends answer. So today I want to walk through the 4 questions that keep coming up for me, the ones that nobody seems to want to give me a straight answer on, and tell you where I have landed on each one of these, because I'm not there yet. I'm just a couple of years out and trying to get this right before I have to actually live with the decisions that I make. Now, the first one is probably the biggest one, and it's the one that started this whole research kick for me. How much money do I actually need? Every calculator I've ever plugged my numbers into does the exact same thing. It takes what I spend now, tacks on about 3% a year for inflation, and runs that straight line out for the next 30 years. Like I'm going to spend the exact same amount at 85 that I spend at 65. And when we run the numbers that way, the number it spits out is scary. It's big. It's the kind of number that makes you think you've got years and years of work left that you need to do, whether you want to or not. But here's the thing, and this took me a while to understand. That's not how retirement spending actually works. It follows more of a curve. Some people would call it a spending curve or a spending smile, and it makes a lot of sense once you think about it. In your early years, the go-go years, if you will, you're active, you're traveling, you're doing all the things that you have been waiting for your whole life. So you're spending more. Then things naturally slow down a little bit in your 70s. You're still comfortable, but you're not moving at the same pace, so spending starts to level off. And based on my research, by the time most people are in their 80s, the world starts to get a little smaller, and you're just not spending like you used to because you're not doing as much. Now, don't get me wrong, health costs can spike late in life and blow that curve up for some folks. I'm not saying that you need to ignore that, and I'm not saying I'm ignoring that, but for the ordinary day-to-day spending, the flatline calculators just don't reflect how life actually goes as you age. I've got a friend who's a couple years further into this than I am, and he told me he almost talked himself out of retiring completely because the calculators had told him that he needed to hit a number that he wasn't going to hit when he wanted to retire. So he was going to have to essentially continue to work another 3 or 4 years to be able to live in retirement comfortably in any way, shape, or form. But when he finally sat down and he started breaking things down and he started taking that curve into effect, into consideration, instead of a flat line, he realized basically he was already where he needed to be able to retire. And that conversation really stuck with me because it's exactly the kind of thing I don't want to fall into. I don't want to fall into that trap, working extra hours, chasing a number for a spreadsheet, made up numbers that aren't actually going to reflect how I'm going to live. So when I started running my own numbers with that curve in mind, instead of a flat line, that 3% every year, it changed everything for me. It didn't magically solve all my problems. I'm still working through what my numbers will actually look like, but it took some of the panic out of my mind. I stopped looking at this one giant scary number and started thinking about it more like, what do I actually need to be comfortable in the first several years of retirement? And how does that probably taper as I get older? And to be honest, that's a much easier question to sit with than, do I have enough money to last me until I'm 95, spending like I'm 65? Now, I'll admit it, for a long time, I just took whatever number the calculators gave me at face value, like a dummy, because it was a computer spitting out math, and who am I to argue with math or a computer? It never occurred to me to ask what assumptions were baked into that math in the first place. Now, every time I see one of these calculators, the first thing I do is I ask, what is it assuming about my spending in year 20 versus year 1 of retirement? Because if it's assuming flat, I already know that number is going to be padded higher than it probably needs to be. The second thing is Social Security, and specifically when to actually take it. Now, I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to rehash the entire thing, but here's what keeps nagging at me about it every time I come back to it. Most people don't actually make a decision on this. They just take it the moment they're eligible at age 62, or whenever they just happen to randomly retire because it feels like the natural thing to do. What they don't really think through, though, is that they're locking in a permanent pay cut when they do that. You see, if you take Social Security at age 62, your benefit is reduced, and that reduction follows you for the rest of your life. It doesn't correct itself later, no matter how the market does or how long you live. But if you wait past your full retirement age, your benefit actually grows about 8% every single year, all the way up to 70. That's a guaranteed return. No market risk attached to it at all. Nobody can take that 8% away. Now, that's an average that I have seen. That's not necessarily what you're going to see or what I'm going to see, that 8%. But when you run that gap between 62 and 70 over 20 or 25 years in retirement, you're talking about a difference that can run well over $100,000 of lifetime income for you. For some couples, it's even more than that, especially if there's a higher earner and a lower earner in the household and they coordinate the timing between the two of them. Now, I'm not trying to say that everybody should wait until 70, and I'm not saying I'm going to wait until 70. That's not a one-size-fits-all thing. If you need the income to eat, to keep the lights on, you need to take it. And if your health isn't great, that changes the math too. But the real question isn't, should I take it early or late? It's, can I bridge the gap? Meaning, can I cover my expenses from savings for a few extra years so my Social Security checks get to grow into something bigger and more guaranteed down the road? For me, being self-employed with no pension sitting there waiting for me, this is really the one lever I've got that's a sure thing. Everything else in my plan has some risk baked into it. The market can go up or the market can go down, but that 8% a year for waiting is locked in no matter what happens anywhere else. So my current thinking is I want to bridge that gap as long as I reasonably can, but I'll be honest with you, I don't have it fully nailed down yet either. I keep going back and forth on it quite a bit. What I keep coming back to is that this isn't really a math problem so much as a nerve problem. The math tells you waiting is usually worth it if you can swing it. The nerves, however, that part is watching the account balance you're bridging go down every single month while your Social Security is just sitting there, not turned on, not growing, not giving you a regular check every month. That's a strange feeling, watching money go out the door on purpose while telling yourself the bigger number is coming later down the road. I don't think you really understand that feeling until you're the one living it too. And I know I'm going to have to make peace with those decisions myself here in the next couple of years. Now, the third big question is where it starts to really get interesting, and honestly, a little confusing for me the first time I really started to dig into it. And that is taxes. I always just assumed that when you retire, your taxes kind of automatically go down on their own. That's just what happens, right? You stop working, you make less money, you pay less in taxes. Turns out that's not really true. And for some retirees, taxes can actually go up if they're not paying attention to how their income is structured. Here's the piece that took me a minute to really understand. There's a difference between your marginal rate, which is what you pay on your last dollar of income, and your average rate, which is what you actually pay across all your income once you add it all up. When you're working, you might be sitting at the 24% bracket, and it feels like you're handing over 20% of everything you make to the government, but you're not. That's just the rate on the top slice. In retirement, if your income is structured right, your average rate can end up down in the single digits. Some retirees really are paying under 10% total taxes, and others, because of how they're pulling their money, end up paying 30 or 35% or more without even realizing what happened to them. Now, when I'm talking about these taxes, I'm talking about income taxes. I'm not talking about the sales tax of everything that you're buying too. But then those sales taxes are just kind of built into your budget, into what you're spending when you go to the grocery store, or you go to buy clothes or whatever you need to go buy. I have another friend of mine who works in financial planning, and he was telling me about this not too long ago, how it really comes down to which account the money comes out of. If it comes out of a traditional pre-tax account, it gets taxed as regular income. If it's coming out of a Roth, well, then it comes out tax-free. If it's a regular brokerage account with long-term gains, you might actually owe 0 in capital gains tax depending on where you land. And then Social Security itself might be partly taxable or not taxable at all, depending on what else is showing up on your return that year, as well as where you live. Blend all of that together the right way and you keep your tax rates down low. Pull it the wrong way and you can push yourself into a much higher tax bracket without ever meaning to. And then on top of that, you can trigger higher Medicare premiums too, because those are tied to your income. So one bad year of withdrawals can end up costing you in 2 or 3 different places at once. Now here's where it gets personal for me, and honestly, I started to see a little bit of relief once I started digging into it. Almost everything I've got set aside outside of Social Security for me is sitting in my Roth IRA. It's not a huge account. I'm not talking about millions here, not even close to hundreds of thousands in here, but it's real money, and it's the one piece I've actually built up on my own without an employer doing it for me. And because it's a Roth, whatever I pull from it comes out tax-free, period. It doesn't matter when I take it or how much I take a year. And it's not going to bump me into a higher tax bracket the way a traditional account would. So when I think about that whole marginal versus average rate thing, I might actually land closer to that single digit end about taxes by accident, just because there isn't really another taxable pot for me to be pulling from and mixing things up. Now, don't get me wrong, I still want to understand this fully before I retire, because Social Security being partly taxable depending on other income is still something I need to nail down for my own situation. But it was nice for me to realize that I'm not sitting on the mess I thought I might be sitting on. And you know what? It made me appreciate something I hadn't really given myself credit for, which is that all of the years I put into building that Roth up on my own after I went out on my own, no employer, no automatic payroll deduction, just me choosing to move money into it on purpose. That decision is quietly paying off in a way I didn't fully understand until I actually sat down and started working through the numbers to see what it means at the end of the day. And this brings me to the fourth thing, and this one really caught my attention. I actually had it wrong in my own head for a while. I mean flat wrong, not just fuzzy on the details. The mistake a lot of retirees make is pulling from these easy accounts first, usually a regular brokerage account, and just letting their traditional IRA sit there and grow untouched. Sounds smart on the surface. No penalty, no age restrictions, why not? But the problem shows up later because once you hit your required minimum distribution age, the government forces you to start pulling big chunks out of that IRA, whether you need the income or not, right around the time your spending has actually started to slow down. And all of a sudden, that forced income can make more of your Social Security taxable and even trigger higher Medicare premiums you weren't expecting. It's like the tax bill just shows up on your porch one day and you had no idea it was coming. Now here's the part where I had to do some actual homework myself because I'd been carrying around an assumption for probably a couple of years now without ever checking to see if it was true. I always figured that at some point, maybe around 70, the government was going to force me to start pulling out of my Roth whether I wanted to or not, the same way it does with a traditional IRA. So I finally sat down and I actually looked it up instead of just repeating that assumption to myself again and again and again because I didn't want to keep planning around something I never actually confirmed. And it turns out I had that completely wrong. Roth IRAs don't have any required withdrawals at all during your lifetime. None at 70, none at 73, none at 80, not ever, as long as you are the original owner. That rule only kicks in for the people who inherit it after you're gone. So that whole account order trap that I was looking at is really about the one where you own an IRA that turns into a forced tax bomb in your 70s. That's simply not a problem for me that I'm going to run into because there's no traditional IRA that I am sitting on. I only have my Roth IRA. Now that doesn't mean I've got this all figured out because I still don't have a real answer on when I should actually start pulling from my Roth or how much I should take out each year once I do. My thinking right now is I would like to leave it alone as long as I possibly can and let it keep growing and lean on Social Security and whatever else we've got first. And I want to be clear, our cash savings isn't really a part of that living plan that we have. That's our emergency contingency money, the most liquid thing we've got set aside for if something goes wrong, not something I'm counting on to fund day-to-day retirement spending. So between not having a forced withdrawal problem and not having that account order trap to navigate, I feel better about where I stand on this piece than I ever did before I started digging into it, even though the exact timing and the amount is still something I'm trying to work out. And I'll tell you, that's the thing that bugs me most about all of this research I've been doing. Not that the answers are hard to find, but that I was walking around for a couple of years planning my future around an assumption I never once bothered to check to see if it was accurate. And that starts to make me wonder, what else have I got wrong in my head right now that I just haven't gotten around to actually looking at? And honestly, going through all of this account and withdrawal stuff got me thinking about something else that's been sitting in the back of my mind too, which is whether I even want to fully stop earning the moment I retire, or is there a version of this where I keep some income coming in on my own terms? Because the more I looked at it, all four of those questions together, the more I realized they all got easier if there's even a little bit more income showing up alongside them. Here's the thing, if my Roth is smaller than I'd like and I don't have a pension backing me up, the easiest lever I've got isn't some clever tax trick. It's just not fully turning off the income spigot the day I decide to retire. Now, for me, it's not needing to grind a second full-time job. That's not the goal here at all. And honestly, if that was the plan, I don't think I'd even call it retirement anymore. It's more about having something part-time, something flexible, maybe some consulting work and whatever I end up being good at by the time I get there. Just enough money coming in that it takes some of the pressure off of that Roth and the Social Security timing. Even if I got a small amount of income trickling in during those first few years of retirement, that changes the whole math on everything that I just talked about. It means that I can let that Roth sit longer and keep putting money into it and watching it continue to grow. It means the Social Security bridge gets easier to hold without stressing over every dollar. It means the whole tax picture gets even more favorable too, because I'm not forced to draw down anything before I'm actually ready to. And there's also something to it beyond just the money. Being self-employed for a good portion of my working life, I've never really had a hard on-off switch. There was never a gold watch and a last day and then nothing. So the idea of easing into something smaller rather than slamming the brakes on everything I've built feels more natural to me than a clean break would. Maybe that looks like keeping a handful of clients instead of a full book of them. Maybe it looks like something completely different from what I do now. Something I pick up because I enjoy it rather than because I need the paycheck. I genuinely don't know yet, and I'm not going to pretend I've got this all mapped out. And there's a piece of all of this that's got nothing to do with money at all. I've been building things and solving problems for other people my whole life, and I don't know that I want to just flip a switch off one day and stop doing that. Even if the money says I technically could or should, staying a little bit engaged, a little bit useful on my own schedule instead of somebody else's, that might end up mattering to me just as much as whatever extra income it brings in. I don't know what that part-time thing looks like for me right now. Whether it's something related to what I do now or something completely different, whether it's a few hours a week or something more seasonal that ramps up and down through the year. But I've started paying attention to it as a real piece of the plan instead of an afterthought, because when I look at the four things I just walked through, the spending curve, the Social Security timing, the tax picture, and the account order question, having even a little bit of income on the other side of all that changes everything. So that's where my head is right now on the questions that nobody seems to want to give me a straight answer on. I don't have all of them either. I don't have this all figured out. I'm still a couple of years out, and I'm still working through the timing on my Roth and on part-time income and on when I'm going to draw Social Security. But what I would really like to know is where you are in your own journey into retirement. Are you sitting on a Roth like me, or do you have a mix of accounts you're trying to figure out? Have you run your own numbers on Social Security timing, or are you still putting that decision off for a later date? Let me know in the comments down below where you're at in the process, and if you found value in this, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you go ahead and you hit that thumbs up and that subscribe button. It really does help the channel out a lot.